More than 3,000 projects, $50 billion investment, and over 400,000 local jobs. These are some numbers that can describe China's Belt and Road Initiative 10 years on. According to the World Bank, by 2030, if fully implemented, BRI's transport infrastructure is projected to boost global real income by between 1% to 3%, while lifting 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty and 32 million from moderate poverty. However, the journey has not been an easy and smooth one. Take Malaysia as an example. The East Coast Rail Link project was approved in 2016, cancelled by a new government in 2018, resumed in 2019, and is now still under construction. What prevents such projects from staying on track? What can be learned from the hiccups? I'm pleased to be joined for this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, from Beijing by Ong Tee Keat, President of the Belt and Road Initiative Caucus for Asia Pacific and Chairman of the Center for New Inclusive Asia, and also former Federal Transport Minister of Malaysia. Mr. Ong, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this edition of The Point. I want to start by asking you to use 3 different keywords to describe the project 10 years after it was first proposed. Which 3 words would you use?
Well, the 3 words that come to my mind instantly are none other than, first, inclusivity, followed by connectivity and symbiosis. Inclusivity actually is rather straightforward because we know that this initiative actually has been inclusive in nature. It involves all nations, either from the global south or the developed countries. There's no such thing as certain segment of the world were to be excluded. This is number 1. And followed by connectivity. And we all know that this has been the model, a unique model that involves connectivity in 5 aspects. 5 aspects, ranging from logistics, trade, finance, and human connectivity. Whereas symbiosis signifies mutually beneficial or win-win in the perspective of general public. I notice in many instances, BRI is either deliberately or inadvertently portrayed as an altruistic run that runs contrary to what it was intended.
Now, let's take some projects in Malaysia as an example. There is this 2 countries twin parks project, which is a flagship between China and Malaysia under the Belt and Road Initiative. And last year marks its 10th anniversary. So what's the concrete benefits that this project has brought to Malaysia and to the industries and residents who are associated with these industrial parks?
And when we talk about BRI in Malaysia, the first thing coming to our mind is none other than the landmark project in the 2 countries' twin parks. 2 countries' twin parks actually involve the construction of 2 national level industrial parks in Kuantan, Malaysia, as well as Qinzhou, China. And so far, this has been going on steadily. And I presume we have ample space to further develop the twin parks in 2 different countries concurrently. I am cautiously optimistic in the prospect of developing the 2 parks. And on the other hand, perhaps if I may shed some light on the ECRL project, the East Coast Rail Link, which has been talked about at one time, particularly when it was stalled for a short span of time. The BRI critics I observed, they like to label the ECRL project as a Chinese death trap And the stalling of the project as a purported pushback by Malaysian authorities against what they call Beijing's economic quotient. To my understanding, this is nothing more than a pack of lies. And the motive behind is none other than the intention to stigmatize China and the project per se. And if I may recollect the progress of the project, it was stalled immediately after the change of guards, after our election in 2018. Thereafter, actually, there was a reconfiguration of the alignment, the railway alignment. The project was revived again in 2019, shortly after 1 year. But we didn't expect that there were some further changes when the new government, soon after the new government collapsed, after hardly 2 years, the original configuration of alignment was again adopted. And all this flip-flop actually is nothing but attributable to the political changes in our country, in Malaysia. And there's nothing or whatsoever attributable to China.
What can we expect going forward? Do you think this kind of back and forth will continue to exist and hinder such economic cooperation projects? Or do you think that emerging from such experience, people may probably have a better idea of what the politicking is really taking a toll on? You know, that the project is being delayed, that the people's conveniences, you know, what they can benefit from this project is being pushed further down the line.
Actually, I would say very unfortunate indeed. Many a time, partisans in our country, perhaps, they may not be able to see the interest of the projects which is going to be brought to the people, but rather they would go hair-split over the consideration of their political interests. And in this particular project, I must say that it is going to reshape the logistical connectivity between the East Coast and West Coast of Peninsular Malaysia. And by so doing, we are cautiously optimistic that when the project is completed, certainly it is going to transform the economic backwater in our East Coast states now into a new hub of connectivity that is going to bring about economic benefits to the backwater. I must say that this has been going on steadily.
How would you describe the agenda of China here, if I can use this word, to invest and help Malaysia build a domestic railway? What interest do you think China is trying to reap from such cooperation by helping Malaysia get a better infrastructure? How would you explain it to the local people?
Here on, when I use the word symbiosis, actually, I mean to say that ultimately, the outcome is going to benefit not just the Chinese contractors or the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises undertaking the project, but rather the people at large, the people in Malaysia. They are the ultimate beneficiaries of the project. And that is the reason why I use the word symbiosis or mutually beneficial. And it is not just one-way grant, one-way so-called overseas grant given to Malaysia. That is not true. But unfortunately, such misconception is still prevalent among certain people, among certain quarters of the population.
You are in Beijing, maybe one of the first few times after the 3-year COVID pandemic, and you must be going around seeing things, possibly shopping as well. What kind of experience that have impressed you or that you find interesting that can be brought to Malaysia, for instance, or vice versa, maybe something that Malaysia can offer to China as well in terms of digital economy?
What is conspicuously felt is none other than the cashless society, cashless shopping that has been prevalent in China nowadays. And in Malaysia, or even for this matter, in the entire region, we are still heavily dependent on credit cards, debit cards, or even cash. It makes the difference. And I presume many of our people, our Malaysians, they are yearning for the advent of such an era where we don't need to carry along a lot of cash to do our shopping.
Well, China is definitely marching ahead in terms of digital infrastructure. We just know the latest phone, for instance, coming out of the Chinese phone maker Huawei, that can make satellite calls out of your smartphones. But anyway, let's move on to the blue economy. This seemed not to have been talked so much, whereas China and Southeast Asian countries share a lot of commonality in this regard. We share same waters, for instance. What can be done there? What can be done there in terms of blue economy?
I must admit that it is still a relatively under-harnessed sector, where the potential has yet to be adequately unleashed, given that the region is blessed with abundance of marine resources in our territorial waters. And the ASEAN leaders' declaration on blue economy way back in 2021 signifies the regional bloc's commitment to developing the blue economy sustainably. I think this is an important commitment to developing blue economy sustainably. The complementarity between ASEAN's agenda and China's expertise makes a good match for China-ASEAN economic collaboration in developing the blue economy. And so far, has there been such a collaboration? Perhaps this is the question you might likely ask. Because in the past, we were more focused on seafood trading, but that would not represent the entirety of developing the blue economy. Now that I could see that fishery is one of the outstanding sectors, now where countries like Malaysia and China could further develop. That means to say we should go beyond the so-called seafood trading only. Things like aquaculture and exchange of fishery information, fishery technology, for instance. These are the new areas where two countries should work concertedly, because I have yet to see a comprehensive framework be drafted along this line.
Do you foresee the kind of differences among ASEAN countries kind of disrupting or preventing certain collaboration among ASEAN countries? Do you see that? Because sometimes these differences can be blown out of proportion or can be highlighted on the international media, giving people the impression that there is a lot of tension there. What is your take on that?
I must say that in nurturing the prevailing condition, the prevailing relationship between ASEAN and China, now, what remains to be addressed urgently is the lack of track two diplomacy. Track two diplomacy, or rather, I would describe it in the layman's term, the people-to-people diplomacy. This has been lacking now in our past decade of implementing BRI. And perhaps we should focus more on the human aspect, the human connectivity aspect of track 2 diplomacy in implementing our BRI. What is the use if we were to encourage more interaction between the civil societies or even the trade associations between the two countries? Certainly, this would help in addressing the trust deficit, which has been a sensitive issue when we nurture the kind of relationship between Malaysia and China, or between ASEAN and China. And this is something which is more relevant when we are now facing such a new challenge that is none other than the wedge driving by powers from outside the region. And I hope to say, end of the day, BRI implementation is not just confined to the sheer economics. It should be an all-dimensional model, four-dimensional platform that enables us to develop our countries.
Why has there been a lack or not insufficient people-to-people interaction? Has it been hindered by, I don't know, bureaucracy or a lack of importance that's attached to it, or a tradition of not talking to each other so much? How would you explain that? Because if you want to tackle a problem, you go to the source of it. You find out what the problems are and you tackle them.
You have to acknowledge that the social structure of both China and Malaysia, or for this matter, even the entire ASEAN, are not identical. Or perhaps, if I may say, there are differences in the structure, the social structure. And when we talk about the NGO interaction, of course, it is not just confined to the Chinese-based, the ethnic Chinese-based NGOs in the Southeast Asian countries. More importantly, as I said earlier, BRI is an inclusive model. We have to encourage more interaction, more exchange in real sense between the NGOs from both sides, NGOs as well as the trade associations, or even sometimes the interaction of professional bodies. And all this is still lacking now in our kind of rapport or bilateral ties. And I presume these are the areas where we can further develop, further explore.
Right now, there are conflicting ideas that are being advocated by China and by the West, especially led by the United States. For instance, some scholars in the US talk about a clash of civilizations, or you hear the constant warning against China's growing ambition or growing influence or growing prowess in this region, especially the kind of security threat that China may pose to the region. But on the other hand, China is proposing initiatives, peaceful initiatives, such as on development, such as on cultural exchanges, such as on security, how countries can coexist in peace. So what do people in countries in the region see these kind of different ideas? What do they aspire?
Well, I presume people in the region, including our Malaysians. Now, certainly we are more concerned about the well-being of our children, our generations to come. And at the same time, it is our duty to endeavor towards that direction. That is, to provide good life and to enhance the well-being of the entire society for our generations to come. But in the case of America, so far I do observe that all the gimmicks, all the strategic moves, so to speak, in containing China is simply rooted in their fear, or rather their anguish of being displaced as the sole global leader. This is the kind of anguish that really make them obsessed. And the obsession itself has triggered a lot more illogical moves, which we have been seeing in the past decade until today. And I see there's no reason why now we should be apologetic when we want to pursue our path of development. And at the same time, we have to be wary of such moves.
You have written in an commentary, you said that at the current juncture, the US is pushing for countries both large and small to take sides, particularly aiming to curb China's advances in economic and high-tech sectors. However, this approach is unlikely to yield the desired results. Why do you say that? Americans will not be very happy.
The first example coming to my mind is none other than the overwhelmingly high overlapping membership of both RCEP and IPEF. IPEF, we know that this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is now being led by America. And we just take a look at the membership. 7 out of 10 ASEAN member states. That is fine. But at the same time, one of the main attraction is none other than the so-called the resilience of supply chain that they have been propagating. Let us take a look at the supply chain agreement that was concluded in May this year in Detroit under the framework of IPEF. Now, I was rather dismayed by the outcome, because instead of coming out with a substitute or an alternative, a viable alternative to the prevailing supply chain, which is subject to possible disruption in the event of any outbreak or unknown factors, I don't see any substitute being brought out by IEF. But instead, what we saw was none other than the rolling out of an emergency response mechanism, which I must say, the same response mechanism could easily be done as well within RCEP. RCEP, because by itself, it should have sufficient means to do so, given that China, being the leading, or rather the biggest economy in the group, China being equipped with a full gamut of industrial supply chains, certainly it could be playing a very pivotal role in averting any supply chain disruption. I don't see any, because IPEF know very well that it is intended to exclude China.
Yeah, instead of benefiting the country.
So, you have to come up with a substitute which is convincing enough. I don't see any.
Do you have the impression that the Belt and Road Initiative is increasingly becoming a thing for the global south that's led by China, although it was not the original intention? I mean, China extended invitation to everybody. The Americans were invited, Indians were invited, but now it seems that it's becoming more and more a thing of the global south. Are you observing such a trend? If so, what kind of factors could have contributed to the shift?
BRI has not been designed in such a way to benefit only the global south. Let me make it clear. But In the past decade of implementation, most of the projects earmarked under BRI were related to infrastructure development, particularly those in the Global South countries. And we all know that the Global South, in fact, they have a thirst for infrastructural development as compared to the developed economies. In the case of the developed economies, partly we see they attach significance to infrastructural development. Does it mean that they stand to gain nothing at all by embarking on BRI? I could see that in the past 10 years, these countries, perhaps, they must have different focus as compared to the Global South. They are more inclined to develop their trading. They're trading with China. And these are the aspects that we can see very clearly. When the Global South, they are more concerned, they are more focused on infrastructural development, certainly this would create the hype, the public hype, and also at the same time be able to attract more attention and international limelight. Whereas in the case of trading, very seldom have you come across public hype be created now in favor of this trading activities or enhancement of trading. Now that benefits the developed economies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ong Tee Keat, former Federal Minister of Transport of Malaysia. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.